Our ensemble today is Michael, which is a lot of fun for me. This will be a blast, right? Yeah. Last week we talked about Brahms. I'm going to mention him a little bit. But this is, as you probably know, the 150th anniversary of the birth of Ravel this whole year. And so there's a lot of Ravel going on. There are a lot of movies about Ravel on the internet. You can watch hours and hours of movies and everything being performed. It's very exciting. And what's strange for me, you know, I like to think about how composers overlap. And when Brahms died, Ravel was 22 already, which is a funny thought. And Ravel died in 1937, but it's strange. I knew some people who knew Ravel. And I'm just going to tell you about two of them very briefly. When I was a student at Juilliard in the 70s, that's the 1970s, the fact that you're laughing at that is very disturbing. Beveridge Webster, did you know him at all? No. He taught piano at Juilliard then, and Beveridge Webster knew Ravel extremely well. The age part of it is very interesting because Beveridge Webster went to Europe to study. He was an American when he was 14. And he met Ravel very quickly, and he became a friend of Ravel's, and Ravel thought he was an amazing young pianist and featured him in concerts. And in fact, when he was 16, when Beveridge Webster was 16, he premiered the version of Cigane that has what's called a luteal, which is a mechanical device that goes inside a regular piano. So the luteal is a completely worthless device, especially now with all the digital things we have, but it basically sounds like you put paper and clips and other garbage in the piano, because it kind of was like that. Put it in the piano, and it makes it sound a little maybe like a cembalo harpsichord piano. So Beveridge Webster played that with the violinist, Samuel Dushkin, and I also knew Samuel Dushkin. Now Samuel Dushkin, who also knew Ravel very well, but more importantly for him, he was extremely close to Igor Stravinsky and premiered the Violin Concerto and the Duo Concerton, which were written for him. Dushkin, I knew him. I had dinner with him when I was 16, which now that I've mentioned Beveridge Webster being 16, maybe it's not so odd. He was in his late 70s at the time. And why was this happening? Because Sam Dushkin's brother David founded a music school called the Kinhaven Music School in Vermont, which is a very popular camp that people go to, and I went there as a kid. So I managed to have dinner with his brother, Sam. So that's two people who knew Ravel. I actually know another one, but I don't want to talk about that guy. I'm not kidding, right? Yeah, kidding. Okay. Now, Brahms, we know, was a perfectionist, and so was Ravel. Not every composer is like this. Ravel would not release a piece that wasn't perfect, so same was true with Brahms. He would write a piece and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it, and then he had far fewer pieces finished than many of his contemporaries because of that. And one of the reasons he was so meticulous, and an aspect of his music had to do with his father and his brother, because they were very nice people, in case you were thinking something not nice. No, it's because they were engineers, mechanical engineers, and very brilliant. And Ravel grew up with a love and respect for engineering and mathematics and machines and toys, anything made well. So he wanted to make sure what he made was made very well. His father invented various engines, including an important car engine that was used for a while. He also invented a thing called the Wheel of Death, which was a circus act with a car that was spinning around, and it was very popular. Even the Barnum and Bailey Circus had it until, unfortunately, somebody died driving it. I know, it's funny now. Everything's funny. You remind me of Mel Brooks when you laugh at that. His definition of comedy, you know, it's like if I slip on a banana peel, it's tragedy. If you slip on one, it's comedy. Yeah, so someone died in that machine. Okay. Anyway, but Ravel's music, a lot of his music is very machine-inspired. He had in his home lots of toys and devices that were mechanical because he just loved collecting them. And people gave him things like this too. He had wind-up toys. He had inkwells that moved and did things. He had clocks that were very unusual. Michael's going to play just a few moments of the opening of the sonatine because it has gears right in the middle of it. Yeah, and you can hear the little gears. We're not going to examine that piece closely, but that right there, that's so typical of Ravel's mechanical fascination. You know, I'm going to compare Brahms and Ravel a little bit because there's some huge oppositional things that are interesting to think about. Brahms' unassailable structures and logic becomes in Ravel a logic kind of based on dreams rather than action. Because Brahms inherited the tradition of narrative storytelling in a piece, where there was action, and there was an argument. The melody is like an argument, and how it unfolds in So Not a Form is like an argument that's explored and resolved. With Debussy and Ravel, and I have to put them together occasionally for this, that doesn't happen. It's more about a dreamlike situation that still, with Ravel, is controlled meticulously. But it's still associative dreaming rather than action and argument. The functioning chords that we have, and I'll get to the piano in a minute and give Michael a break soon to discuss what I'm discussing now about harmony. But the functioning harmony that Brahms used, which was the harmony of Bach on, very specific, a hierarchy, an ordering of how chords relate to each other, how you change key, how things end, all of that kind of disappeared with Debussy, and with Ravel he used it and added onto it. So there's an extended sense of harmony that goes beyond order and hierarchy to just the best way I think to think of this, and it's not an original thought, although I thought it was, but I found other people thinking it too, is that it's like lighting. It's like if you take an object and you light it, that's not the same thing as function. So, I mean, if I always think of the rooms in a house or an apartment, they have functions. You know, you have a bedroom and a kitchen and et cetera. Each room has a name that tells you what you do there, and that's function. But a room on stage that could be anything and has lighting, that's what this becomes like. The harmony is like lighting. Another thing that changes is foreground and background. The idea of a melody with an accompaniment, something clearly in the foreground of music and something clearly in the background, that sort of disappears, not completely, but you get a lot of music that is just surface, especially music about water, which he wrote a lot, but music that is the play and interacting of a surface of sound. Now, before I play, you can relax because I'm going to go, no smoking. I'm going to describe the harmony in just a moment, but there's a poem by Paul Verlaine, in case my wife is listening, she grew up in France, which sums up the way poets thought of music at the time. And they wrote a lot about it. They wished they were composers. Mallarmé, I'm not going to read any Mallarmé right now, but he was set to music by everybody at that time and continued all the way through Boulez. The French love him. And Mallarmé's big problem was that he wanted to be writing music, but he had to use words. So it was a problem. But he got pretty close. But Verlaine wrote this. It's called Art Poétique, and I'll read it in English. I had to translate it myself because I read 30 translations and I hated them. I mean, just because they were either rhyming or terrible in some other way. So I think you need to put the title in the first sentence. The art of poetry should be musical above all else. And so use uneven rhythms, more vague and like a mist, without weight, without substance. That describes Debussy and Ravel, but they're very different from each other. But you know, a lot of people on the street especially, they think that Debussy influenced Ravel, period. But it's not true. They influenced each other. The first piece we're going to get into when we do is Jeu d'eau of Ravel was written before Debussy wrote his piano works, and almost everything Debussy's piano music does, Ravel did first in his piano writing. So there's that. Yes, there's a lot of harmony that Debussy, being older and a great experimenter, he discovered a lot first, and Ravel absorbed it, but a completely different way. And there's a description that I like of the difference between Debussy and Ravel by someone who knew them both, Jacques Février, a pianist who lived until 1969, was born in 1979, and in 1969 he did an interview on French TV in which he called Debussy un poète voluptueux, a voluptuous poet, and Ravel un classique sensuel, a classics, or I would say a sensual classicist. So one is a poet of voluptuous words, really, of voluptuous writing, and the other is a classicist, but sensual. And this is quite different. I think it's very well said. So I'm going to go to the piano now and do what normally at Juilliard is 3 years in about 3 minutes. So hang in there. But I think it's possible to do this. In order to really understand the harmony in some level, you really just need to engage your ear more than all these words I'm going to throw around. But I've talked about this before because it's true of every piece we've looked at, that you have a triad, which if you take the scale and skip a note, we build triads in thirds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 3, 5. Then you add a seventh, which could be, there are several ones, but let's stick here, this one. 1, 3, 5, 7. Now that's a very common chord. Now if I keep going, 7, 9. That's getting us to Debussy and Ravel, not because it wasn't used by other composers, but because they thought of it as consonant. It didn't need to resolve. It could just stay there. Okay, then we could keep going. That's 9, 11, and 11 is more dissonant, so they don't use it as much. 13. And you probably think, oh, that sounds familiar. I heard that at the hotel last week in the lobby. But it's true. If you get good at taking, this is called a dominant ninth. There's the 9. If you get good at moving dominant ninths around, you could work in a hotel lobby. Or write impressionist music, which is not what this is exactly. Now, so one of the things that's important about this is that both Ravel and Debussy, and we're only going to talk about Ravel now, like to use these chords for color, like lighting. It didn't matter if it was in the right key. So, for example, if we take Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which I take frequently, but it's so easy. First two notes are the same. So normally the harmony was this. It stays in a key, it modulates, but it's all hierarchical key writing. So the first chord, I could add a 6, which is the same as adding a 13. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 13. Oh, I can't sing that high. I could do that, but I could also decide that this note is not going to even be harmonized by the key. Let's put it as the 9th. Or let's start as the 9th and then make it the 7th of a major 7th chord. And now let's make this a 9th. And let's go to that 9th again, the other one. Now there are other things we could do, but you hear that sounds a little like jazz piano, right? Because it is. And because Ravel's influence on jazz was huge. And I will be playing examples of that. And it's not something that was unknown. I mean, jazz musicians during Ravel's lifetime were Ravel fanatics. A lot of them were. They learned from Debussy too, and when George Gershwin went to Paris to write American in Paris, I mean, he wrote it at home, but when he went there, he came back with 11 volumes of Debussy's music. But Ravel did even more so for all those jazz composers because, as you'll hear, especially in Valse Noble et Sentimentale, those waltzes are just packed with progressions that jazz musicians became excited about and used. So there's also whole tones and pentatonic. So in other words, we have major and minor, and we have modes like Dorian and whole tones. These are just different scales and modes that in the early 20th century, the composers more and more felt free to use them interchangeably as much as they want. You can start in major, harmonize in a different key, write a whole tone scale, pentatonicism, 5-note scale, which are the black keys. Whenever I mention pentatonicism, somebody leaves. No, I'm kidding. Okay. That's pentatonic. So let's say Ravel's still, he's doing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and he starts with a 9th chord. The C, instead of being the root, is the 9th. Now it's the 7th. What if he decided that this was going to be whole tones? And this too. That could be possible. And then let's go back and do it differently. Let's say this is going to be Ravel's favorite chord, is to make this note the 9th over a minor triad. That's Ravel's favorite chord. And I used to think that, and then it was affirmed by Messiaen, who wrote an article in which he said, I call this the Ravel chord. So there you go. And because Messiaen said it, I think it's important. So we're doing the Ravel chord, whole tones, and now a blues chord. Now, blues chords are really interesting because they exist in different cultures and for different purposes. And Ravel loved jazz, but he was using that chord before he heard any. Now, how did that happen? Well, Chopin referred to it a little bit. You know what that is? Yeah, of course. What is it? Right, no, I'm just yeah, I'm going to play a little of it later. But also, he did it because there's another thing he could use, another scale, not the whole tone scale, not major, not minor, not Dorian. There's an entire collection of notes we call the octatonic scale, which I have referred to occasionally. And these days, don't take out your phone, but Wikipedia has a really good article on octatonicism. But anyway, octatonicism is a scale that alternates half steps and whole steps. So it sounds like this. Whoops, sorry, that was wrong. And you cannot get this chord progression from that scale. Not available. You can get this, and you can get this, and you can get chords like this, C major and E flat dominant 7 together, which gives you the C minor and C major simultaneously, and that's blues. C major down here, C minor up there, the E flat, and that comes in Stravinsky like this. Or in l'Histoire. So Ravel can write a chord that's a completely bluesy chord because he was thinking of octatonicism, which he knew very well. So let's add that to Somewhere Over the Rainbow. 9th, whole tones, dominant 9th, octatonic chord, minor chord with a 9th, whole tones. So you can see the connection. Is this making sense? Okay, good. So you can see the connection between the available harmonies and chords and collections of notes. We call a collection is a word I use because a lot of composers use the word collection instead of scale. Because scale is just linear, like a melody, and chords are formed from that, or they also pre-exist. But a collection is more like in math. You have all these notes, you can do all these different things with them, they're a collection. So the octatonic collection, the major collection, the whole tone collection, these things are all available so that you can use them as gels to light the object of the music. Okay, Michael, here we go. So we're going to start with Jeu d'eau, which is, of course, it's usually translated as fountains, but it's not, it's a water play, really. And there's a little, on the top of the score, I'm using both an iPad and paper here. On the top of the score, Ravel's friend, the famous poet Henri Regnier, wrote a little line of poetry, which translated means the river god laughing at the water which tickles him. So this is all about water, and the comment I made about foreground and background makes sense here because it's surface. The music, in fact, Michael, just play the opening and you'll see this could be the accompaniment to something, but it's not. Okay, so that could be like an introduction, and the singer comes in, or the violin, but nobody comes in. And there's no tune, because it's the foreground. The foreground and the background are the same because it sounds like water, and it will sound more and more like water as time goes on. Ravel was 26 when he wrote this, and that's, for Ravel, he's not Mendelssohn or, Mozart. For him, that was very young, because he had a lot of trouble. He was thrown out of the Paris Conservatory. Because the Paris Conservatory at the time had rules that you had to win prizes in every area, or at least in your two major areas, which were, for him, composition and piano. He didn't get a prize, out. But Fauré, his teacher, thought he was great, so Fauré let him back in, not into school officially, but to audit. And he also studied with Gédalge during that time. So moving on, he wrote this for Fauré, is what I was going to say, and dedicated it to him along with the string quartet when he was 26, and still studying with Fauré. Now, I'm going to ask Michael to play that again and go further, and you will hear not only this first chord that well, you can play this. Play just the first chord as a major seventh. It's a major chord with a major seventh. Yeah, so play it like one note at a time. Yeah, and so if you fill that in, right? And it starts with a dissonance, which to our ears is nothing. But at the time, starting with those two notes like that was intense. Play a little further and you'll hear a bunch of whole tones suddenly appearing. Okay? Yeah. Now you heard something. If your ears are going to get good, because we'll do that one more time. You have a major chord with a major seventh, which sounds, it's tonal, perfectly normal, and then the whole tones come in, and there are two whole tone collections alternating with each other. I think you heard that, but I'm going to do it again. So this, because I could analyze it all day, but if you get it in your ear, you won't need any analysis. You might need analysis, but but you won't need harmonic analysis. Okay, let's start again. Here's one chord. That's a whole tone chord. Okay, now, Michael, I just want to do one thing. You don't have to go far. Don't sit down. We had all those whole tone chords, these whole tone chords spread out, but we also had, it looks so different. Here, we had this, which is not a whole tone chord because it could be, some of it, but it also has, so it's not. It's a dominant seventh with a tritone away. Now, I'm mentioning this because this is octatonic. So octatonic music has minor thirds and tritones all over the place. So here is a dominant chord with a tritone. So it would normally resolve like this in old-fashioned more tonal music, but here, that's where it would go. And this is planted now early in the piece because it's going to become enormous, and we're going to have a huge cadenza, octatonic cadenza, that is the so-called Petrushka chord way before Petrushka. Okay, let's keep going. How about let's go to bar 15 so we can hear. Start there? Yeah, we're going to hear at bar 15 in the left hand, which you'll probably bring out anyway, is a pentatonic melody. Yeah, that's just so you hear. We've heard whole tones and pentatonic melodies, and now on the next page, bar 19, you're going to hear two, I have to call them collections, two little pentatonic collections. They're not the same pentatonic scale. They both only have 4 notes. The numerical part of it is not that important, but you think of it as 2 incomplete, different pentatonic scales separated by ideas. Let's hear it together first. Yeah, so the melody that's in the left hand, if you play that as pentatonic, is missing 1 note. Yeah, and it's all black keys except it's missing, okay? But it's 4 out of the 5 notes. The right hand is playing seconds. This is a second, 1, 2. But if you put all the seconds together, it's also 4 notes of a different pentatonic scale. So let's hear it together. Yeah, and why does he do that? Well, it's probably because it sounds like splashing a little bit. So you've got splashing, but it's pentatonic splashing. Okay, I don't think that's a technical term, though. Okay, let's hear them both together again. All right, and now, beautiful. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but let's go to the, I think what we need to do is move. I'm going to skip around because we're going to look at a lot of piano music today. Let's get to the pentatonic, the pentatonic glissando page, which is page 9 for me, and it's bar, whatever it is. We have the same iPad thing here. Yeah. So he's going to start with something else, but you're going to hear only black keys, which is all pentatonic, and Ravel doing something that to us is a familiar kind of music, but it was completely innovative and unusual and startling and upsetting at the time. Mon Dieu! Okay. Qu'est-ce qu'il fait, Ravel? But so you have all black keys going up, and then can you do that tremolo for us? It's all black keys. Now, when little kids do that on someone's piano, people tell them to stop it. There's nothing wrong with that. They just have a vision of Ravel. Yeah. Now, there's a very strange thing about Ravel's sense of perfectionism. And, throughout the history of music, what composers write has changed instruments. Instrument makers respond because instruments need to catch up. Bach was a perfect example. We won't go into it now, but because of Bach, a lot changed, and he even invented some things. And this goes throughout the history of music. And with Ravel, he kept wanting a low G sharp, and there isn't one. There's one now on a Bösendorfer, but there isn't one on a Steinway, and it's just the way it is. So it so happens that Ravel writes low G sharps, really low. This one, here's a G sharp, and here's the other G sharp. what you get instead is an A. But it's so low that Ravel was thinking, oh, nobody will hear that. But he writes in certain pieces, he writes the low G sharp, and you can't play it. In this one, he wrote the low A that's there. So can you play for us, what's a good spot to start that? Yeah. Okay, now, that was supposed to be a low G sharp, which would sound perfectly consonant, but it's this incredible, because this piano is so well tuned, you can tell that it's the wrong note. He writes it 3 times in this piece, hoping it'll appear on his keyboard. I could just see him, because he destroyed manuscripts if there was one wrong note, like Brahms. And he kept that there, and in fact, in Miroir, in the movement called A Boat on the Ocean, Une barque sur l'océan, he writes it there. So actually, there's nothing we can do about it. You can just play a little of it. He still can't play it. But this time, instead of writing the A, he writes the G sharp, thinking maybe it'll appear one day and someone will be able to play it. So can you play that, Elney? It's still going to have the low A. It's really terrible. But when you learned that piece, did you have a moment of what am I supposed to do about this? Mm-hmm. Did you call somebody? Is there a hotline for? Yeah, it's very difficult. I looked online, I Googled, did anyone play, I really did this, did anybody play the low G sharp on an instrument that has it? And I found one YouTube performance of I don't remember his name, I'm sorry, of a piano professor in the Midwest somewhere who's quite a good pianist who played it on a Bösendorfer in order to play that low G sharp. So you can find it, as a matter of fact. Now, after that, let's get to this incredible octatonic moment, which I think what we need to do is start perhaps at bar 70. And let me explain just for a moment. This is called by many musicians the Petrushka chord. Those are the 2 trumpets in Petrushka. It's an F sharp major chord and a C major chord. They're a tritone apart. They exist in the octatonic scale. Stravinsky learned the octatonic scale from Rimsky-Korsakov because it was a big deal in Russia. All the French composers already knew about it, but they didn't say anything. And even Liszt used it. But here, in 1901-2, when he wrote and finished this piece, we have a huge Petrushka moment way before Petrushka, so we need to acknowledge this. You can get a lot out of those 2 chords. Yeah, that's all it is. But what's amazing is how much credit Stravinsky got for that. He knew perfectly well that Ravel had done it. They were very close friends. And they talked about these things, and we know all about that. But somehow Ravel didn't get credit. Everyone was saying for years, not now, but saying for years that he stole harmonies from Debussy, that Stravinsky invented these chords, and Ravel was always left out in the cold. It reminded me of Lynn Harrell. I ran into him on the street years ago, and he said, when I left my cello in the back of a cab, they wrote what a fool I was. And when Yo-Yo left his cello in the back of a cab, he was a genius. What are you going to do? Now, Ravel, I think we should move on to another piece because of time. We're going to take a look at Miroir, the movement called Oiseau Triste. But first I should tell you a little bit of background to this piece. Ravel started a group, like a club, called Les Apaches, the Apaches. I doubt that they could get away with that now, but they probably didn't even know what it was referring to, because Apache referred to hooligans in Paris who some reporters for the newspaper called them Apaches. And that became a word for maverick or anti-establishment person. And so Ravel and his best friend, the pianist Ricardo Viñas, they were very close. They met when they were 13 because their mothers were close because they both were Spanish and spoke Spanish, luckily not here. But they spoke Spanish there, and they were able to become friends. And they started this club with a man named Michel Calvo-Corresi, who was a music critic. And Ravel premiered at a little soiree with this club. He premiered all of Miroir. One of the movements was Oiseau Triste, which he played one day. And these were musicians and artists, writers, poets, and they all would present their work and criticize each other. So Viñas wrote about it, Ravel gave us the first hearing of Oiseau Triste, a new piano piece which I was the only one to like. Then many years later, 1934, Calvo-Corresi wrote, only once in those early days did a work of Ravel bewilder us for a time. It was Oiseau Triste, which he played to us again and again without our being able to understand what he was after. He was rather disconcerted. I love that word for musicians. Okay, he was rather disconcerted to find us indifferent to a piece into which he had put so much of himself. A cartoonist who was a member of the group made a cartoon of it, a verbal picture of Ravel hawking about, extending his finger with two little birds on it, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with them. Okay, it must have been a good cartoon. Now, the Apaches, by the way, had a theme song. And the theme song was this. You don't have to go very far. Let me look at it again. Oh, yeah. That's it. And believe it or not, they would whistle that to each other across concert halls and things. And it's this opening of the second movement of Sibelius Symphony, number 2. No, sorry, not the second movement, second symphony, opening of the second symphony. I think they liked it because it has both the major and minor third, which of course is kind of bluesy. And it has a lowered second degree, so it's all altered. So they did whistle it to each other. All right, so now Oiseau Triste, you know that it was considered very modern and difficult. We don't always think of Ravel that way, but he was a modernist. Let's hear, Michael, if you could play the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 measures. It starts with a bird, that's obvious, but then all kinds of mysterious things happen. And depending on the mood you're in right now, it could sound like music from that time, or you could pretend you were at the first performance, and it's very disturbing. Okay, thank you, Michael. I'm going to do a short analysis of what's going on there. We probably think it's beautiful now. You have to understand that musicians of his time thought it was incomprehensible. It's very interesting how these things change. The bird call, I'm sure nobody had any problem with that, you know, this thing. But as soon as this note is answered with this, and then you get this chord, and the bird comes back, and maybe another bird, which keeps, and then there are several ways to hear it. And by that I mean it's in layers. It's not simple melody and accompaniment. It's 3 layers. And how they interact depends on what you're listening to. So, for example, we hear this E flat minor chord, and then we hear a B minor chord. So let's hear that as the main thing. Now here comes the B minor chord. But there are other things going on. This, at the beginning, the D is dissonant. But when the chord changes, that's consonant, and that is no longer dissonant, no longer consonant. So what we hear as consonant and dissonant is shifting. It's kind of uneasy. But also, you have something that I think Ravel was considering very much, which is this. These are whole tones. We're missing one. That note's not there. Don't hear that. Okay. Because that stays there. And these things are solid. They don't go away. This bird, major third, and this rocking back and forth. And they form whole tones, which means maybe everything else is passing, because that maybe instead of E flat minor, we should just hear that as a temporary dissonance. And then this, when it comes to B, a temporary different dissonance. And this bird is dissonant the whole time to the whole thing. So I think Ravel's hearing all of it, but probably he's got this whole tone thing that he divides up in the middle, and then a minor chords on the bottom, and a completely dissonant bird on top, who is consonant only for the E flat minor chord, but before that and after that, it's dissonant. At the beginning of bar 10, we have another measure that is worth just we'll listen to that measure and take that apart for a moment. Yeah, so what you have, pardonnez-moi, we keep this E flat has become a D sharp, that doesn't matter. Same note on the piano. And we get this chord underneath it. Now that's what I was talking about. This is a root third, 5, 7, a flat 9, and this is a 13. So we get the whole thing. And then there's this, the blue note. So we have it all. We have a blues chord, a lowered 9th, and a 13th. That is the French world summed up in one beautiful chord like that. And it's also what a lot of jazz musicians do. Now, at the bottom of this page, this thing. If you can play this little. Now, if that reminds me of Porgy and Bess, I think it actually is in there, but that's because it is major chords, one major chord after another, in a pentatonic scale. So those major chords do not belong in the same, there's no pentatonic scale that has any of these major chords. So just play that left-hand thing for us. Yeah. And the reason it sounds like jazz or blues is because it so happens that you get the major and minor version of the same chords when you do that. Now, in terms of lighting, let's skip to bar, I think it's 60, where it says, no, it's not. Wait a second. I can't see these little bars. At the very end. Yeah, this thing. Mm-hmm. So now we get the bird. Can you play the E flat bird? Yeah. The bird comes back. It's been there most of the piece. And now everything around it, the lighting has changed. So let's hear that. It's a much happier bird now. Now, another thing that Ravel is doing there is that he gives you, I better just do this so I don't have to ask you to do all this. This stays there. And then he leaves this here and goes down a fifth. Down a third to another fifth, and down another third. So the chord, again, he likes to have something stay while parts of it move away. And what that means is that this note is the third, and now it's the fifth, and now it's the seventh, because that note stays and everything is moving down away from it. So it was the third, and then the fifth, and then the seventh. And then, but the bird has been there all along. And the last chord we get is this E flat minor thing with the D, the same. We eventually end on, he went from A major to E flat minor. And the reason I mention that is a tritone. That is from the octatonic scale. It is not in any key that you would do this. But it's very common in the early 20th century and stays common. And there are several different kinds of what we call tritone substitutions. This is one of them, where instead of what you expect, you get the tritone. It's very common in jazz. Now I think we need to move to another piece. I'm trying to cover a lot of music here. So let's take a look at Tombeau de Couperin. Oh no, is that what? No, Valse Noble et Sentimentale. Valse Noble et Sentimentale. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. Now, whoops. Michael's going to play the opening of Valse Noble et Sentimentale, which was titled after Schubert's two collections of noble waltzes and sentimental waltzes. Doesn't have much to do with Schubert other than that. Yeah, now, those opening chords, talk about people being shocked. Could you just play the first two bars again? Yeah, and again, if some kid plays that on your piano, let them alone. But what was he thinking? Well, first of all, he was enjoying the dissonances, but, pardon me. This chord is by Scarlatti. You have to know how you get there. There it is. And then Scarlatti got there he was living in Spain, and a lot of flamenco chords are like that. Because you have an open string, and then you go. So that's one thing, but also this is a fairly normal chord, not at the time of Scarlatti, but that's a dominant minor ninth, lowered ninth, but he puts the ninth on the bottom. So it's much more dissonant sounding. So that's one place you can hear something like that. Here's some Chopin. Here's the blues note I was going to play for you. You don't stop there, actually, but I'm stopping there. So that is a blues note that is just passing by in Chopin. Now, we don't know how Chopin played it, do we? No. He might have done, which is what everyone always does, but he might have done this. He might have. Don't you think? Yeah. But then he also probably enjoyed that this note gets translated into something else. Here. Now, it's the same note. That's very Ravel, very modern, but Chopin did it, and I think Ravel knew about it. There's also the tritone thing of E and B flat, that's the tritone. This is also Chopin. Now, we don't know how he played that either. He might have backed away from it, you know. I don't think so. Let's see. He probably looked at people like that, right? I think probably. We'll never know. Now, let's go on a little bit in this piece. Again, because of the interest of time, Michael, we're going to move ahead to these things are this thing. Mm-hmm. Oops. Okay, Michael's going to play exactly what Ravel wrote, and you will hear that it sounds completely like a jazz pianist. Yeah, I mean, can you play those chords just a little, spend a little more time on each one? Yeah, now listen to this for a moment. Pardon me. Bill Evans. Bill Evans would have said, if he were here, he would say Ravel was his biggest inspiration harmonically, which is true. And here's just something a little strange. This is, I was going to disguise this, but there's no time. I'll just play it. Now, this chord is very dissonant. In most editions that are, if you buy sheet music for The Sound of Music, it doesn't say that, but that's the score. They think it's too weird, so they write this instead. Making it, it's very lovely, but it's not, it's this. Which is extremely, but that's all the professional recordings have that, but if you buy the sheet music, they give you the wrong thing. Now, I think we better take a quick look. I'm really rushing you through this, Michael, but it's okay. This should have been a 4-hour lecture, but that's I will continue it at home for my wife. So let's take a look at the tombeau, le tombeau du Couperin. We have a few things to say here. And we're just going to look at the movement that's called Follen. If you would play the opening of the Follen. Now, we're getting used to it, but that has a lot of weird dissonances in it. It's full of crunchy notes. So I deconstructed it for you. I'm going to play several versions of the same exact thing, but they're simplified, getting more complicated. So first I removed all the dissonances and give it to you in a minor key. So that could be folk music. Now in the Dorian mode, it still could be folk music. It's just a little closer to Ravel, sorry. Now that Dorian mode is what the Beatles brought into a music that gave them their sound, because if you just give it 4/4, then it becomes that kind of music. But it's the Dorian mode that basically did that. Then if I add the D sharp here, but I harmonize it so it doesn't bother you. So. Now the last version is almost as dissonant as Ravel's, but everything has a simpler function than what Ravel did. Now if we do play the real thing again, and you'll see it's still much more dissonant, but underneath it there's like a whole history of things happening. And now, Michael, would you turn the page and play the pickup into bar 30? And here, this is completely Dorian, but he emphasizes the little dissonances. It's very elegant, much simpler. Now that is pure Dorian, and when I mention the Beatles, it's not, I'm just not kidding around here, because the Beatles got the idea of possibly using these modes that were not being used in popular music. They were used in classical music and folk music. But they got it partly from Vaughan Williams. And Vaughan Williams studied with Ravel. And he didn't learn to use these modes from Ravel, but he did learn Ravel was younger than Vaughan Williams, and they were both quite young. And Ravel said, I'm not going to be like a teacher for you. I'll just be a sounding board and help you become yourself, which he did. And he learned that he should turn to the English folk music and use the modes to be his own self, his real true self. And that got translated into British pop music a few generations later. I just have to play a couple of little things here. Because I find the connection between Ravel and jazz to be very exciting. It's not news. You can read a lot about it, but it's so interesting. This is a piece by someone you'll maybe know. Which could also be played, you know. It makes us make it more French. It's by Billy Strayhorn. It's called Lush Life. Here's a cadence. Billy Strayhorn is the person who wrote a lot of, Take the A Train and a lot of things for Duke Ellington. Here is a cadence by Duke Ellington, just a cadence. It could be this if you take out the interest, but instead of doing this, it's a tritone off. Okay? In other words, instead of C, it's G flat. So it's a tritone substitution. And then instead of just going to F, he puts the ninth in there. So we get two things that Ravel did. All right, now before Michael plays some music for us straight through, if you're still able to do that after all this, I just want to tell a quick little story. Ravel was obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe. And Edgar Allan Poe had written an article on composition. But he was talking about writing poetry. But Ravel decided it was exactly the way he should be writing music. He learned from it quite a lot. And he was writing about, Poe was writing about the Raven. And you can look this up and read the whole thing. It's quite entertaining. The main point, though, is that he decided on the mood first, the number of lines next, that there would be a single word repeated. Then he had to find the word, nevermore. Then he would say, well, why would someone keep repeating nevermore? Maybe it shouldn't be a human being. And as he writes, now I'm going to quote, here then immediately arose, this is Poe writing, immediately arose the idea of a non-reasoning creature capable of speech. And very naturally, a parrot, in the first instance, suggested itself, but was superseded forthwith by a raven as equally capable of speech and infinitely more keeping with the intended tone. Almost a parrot. Now, I mention that not only because I have a parrot, but because he went for, it's like a harmony. He didn't use the thing that comes to mind first or the most obvious choice. He used the one that fits the mood and the tone of what he was doing. And the tone was the overarching thing that made all the decisions, not any other aspect of it, not tradition, not technique, not just the tone, what does it evoke? Also, I should add before we hear this, speaking of Oiseau Triste, which is what he's going to play first, Sad Birds, that Ravel had as a gift given to him a tiny little mechanical bird, a nightingale, like the story of Hans Christian Andersen that Stravinsky said as an opera. He had this tiny little cage with this tiny little bird in it that sang really well and flapped its wings and moved its beak. So of course Ravel thought this was fabulous because he was obsessed with mechanical things, and something that small made that well. Just he loved this thing, and it's still in his house, which you can go see among all his collections of toys and things. It's not in New York, it's in France. Probably it'll end up in New York. So Oiseau Triste, and after Oiseau Triste, Michael is going to play Jeu d'eau, so 2 movements of Ravel.